So let's talk about progress this morning. And, we talk about how important it is when we're gauging progress in any aspect of our life to not get attached to the outcome. And this is true for whatever we're doing, but I want to focus today on how we sort of think about progress on our spiritual path. And I think it's important to check in sort of with ourselves periodically to keep us motivated to sort of see, okay, this is working, or maybe it's not, or where am I, and so forth. But doing this is a little tricky, and it's tricky because of the whole notion of grasping and clinging to expectations and expected outcomes, and especially with our practice, because you know we really need patience because this practice is incremental, it's gradual, it takes time, it's not linear, it kind of does this. Um, and because positive change along the way is slow, most often slow, it's gradual. Sometimes it's difficult to really see or gauge the changes in our day-to-day lives. Um, but it's important that we check in, sort of, check the weather periodically, um, to remind ourselves of what improvements we have experienced. Um, it goes without saying that we have to incorporate our practice, um, and implement the Buddhist teachings into our daily lives. Otherwise we just end up talking about it, theorizing about it, but not really walking the walk. We can talk about this stuff till the cows come home, but if we don't implement it and apply it, we're not going to see any real change in our lives. So my suggestion is that we start each day with an intention, set an intention, when you're brushing your teeth or you get out of the bed or whatever, to incorporate the teachings, or at least an aspect of the teaching. And I find that I have different intentions on different days, or different intentions, on different weeks, just sort of depending what's coming up for me. But set an intention to bring some aspect of the practice into the day every day. Otherwise, we just sort of lose sight of it, or we wait till Sangha and then we get reminded, oh yeah, I've got to think more about letting go, and then it sort of slips our mind. So it really matters, I think, to set that daily intention. And and what I usually use for that is sort of in terms of what's coming up, and this would be my suggestion, is what's my current practice edge? By that I mean, where am I getting most hooked these days? Where am I getting most reactive these days? And then applying the teachings to that edge. Okay. And typically, that edge for most of us is a function of the ego, which we talked about on Wednesday. The edge is fluid, it changes day to day, but it's often derived from some aspect of the ego. And we all have specific themes and recurring themes that are unique to each of us, that we find we're coming back to again and again. I talked a little bit on Wednesday about being impatient, and I've been working a long time on trying to cultivate more patience in my life. It's a recurring edge, and it doesn't take a lot to remind me to set an intention each morning to strive to be more patient. Um, it's and our edge will change depending on the circumstances and who we're interacting with and what's on my schedule today, and whether I have to get my oil changed or be on the phone for an hour with some, credit card company or whatever. So it's always changing, but if we set an intention that today I'm going to work on X or Y, because what's coming up for me is I'm having trouble letting go of this encounter with my uncle or my mother or my daughter. Um, then it sort of directs us. It sort of sets the stage for looking at that. And it's important to remember that it, everything we do here is a work in progress. But sometimes subtly, sometimes more obviously, change is occurring. Okay, this path is a lifelong endeavor. And most of us came to it in midlife, or not so many of us came to it as young people. Um, but back to recognizing progress. I just wanted to set that stage about setting an intention, and 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 I can tell you from my own path that I've struggled with not getting attached to outcomes, not being too goal directed. I mean, that's true in every aspect of my life, but it's really been a challenge in my practice. And I've gotten better at it, but I've got a long way to go. But to accept the positive changes, however subtle, however incremental, as they arise. Okay. We don't chase them. We don't cling to them when they show up. We don't try to pretend they're there when they're not, and so forth. One of the things I most love about our community is when we each share, when others share the changes that they've observed in their own lives. It's inspiring to the rest of us when you talk about a change that you've experienced, when you see a difference in how you're responding to challenges in your life. And when you share that with us, when we share it with each other, it inspires us, it motivates us, it keeps us going. It's why this practice, I think, is so hard to do alone, because you don't have that sort of community saying, yeah, it worked for me, keep going, it'll work for you. It's hard to gauge it when we're practicing alone. The Buddha understood this. He understood with his Sangha, with his community of monks, that they're not all going off into the woods by themselves to practice. They're practicing in community because we benefit from the changes that we hear from each other. For me, as I talk a lot about in my book, the gifts of this practice, which I now enjoy, years ago seemed like a far off dream. Seemed like this is never going to happen, but they were incremental. They weren't so obvious along the way, which, but they do show up, and very often they show up when others say, oh gosh, so and so, you seem to really respond differently to that upsetting situation, or you seem to really be handling things so much more with equanimity, or you seem to be just letting go of the little stuff in your life, or whatever. Sometimes we hear it from outsiders. Sometimes we hear it from each other here in community in Sangha. Um, but it's important as that happens, as we recognize even these incremental changes, that we practice gratitude. Remember the gratitude for the gifts that this practice brings to our lives. That's another motivator. I can tell you, I've said this repeatedly, words cannot adequately express the gratitude I have for this practice. The peace and the change in my life that it's brought over the years. But it was not overnight, and we have to have the long view. We have to have, it's a long-term process, but it's not just go from A and then leap to Z. It is incremental, so we see changes along the way, and we use those changes, as I said, as we recognize them, to keep us going, to keep us motivated. The gift that this practice brings in terms of reduced suffering in our lives, in terms of changing our view, our perspective, improving our relationships, um, is the gift is beyond measure. I mean, you can't even quantify it. It's just that's significant. I often say if we digress and get too focused on sort of the esoteric aspects of the Buddhist teaching, I just had a discussion this week with someone about this. We can get lost in that. We can get lost in the forest and lose sight of our efforts to reduce our day-to-day suffering. I have no problem with studying that and interest in that as an academic exercise, but I don't think it's um, where change really happens. And the Buddha said as much. I mean, he was a pragmatist. He said, see what works, try it out. He wasn't saying, oh, talk about this, talk about all this esoteric stuff. He was saying, do this, do that. He gave us a prescription. He gave us a roadmap. He said, give it a try, see if it works. And it has worked well enough to survive 2,600 years in various iterations, to continue as being, a gift to humanity, really. Um, so remind ourselves. Sometimes we measure our progress by taking in an inventory, to remind ourselves of the insights that we've gained, We only have to look a little bit about, how would I have handled this 5 years ago? How might I have handled this last year? Oh my gosh, this is really different. You know, you know, Tom's not yelling at other drivers now. He's wishing that they become better drivers. I mean, that's a change. These changes happen. Um, and sometimes it's important to step outside of ourselves and think, how might this look from someone else's perspective? How might this look from a fellow Sangha member's perspective, the way I just handled that? They might say, golly, you really handle that differently. Because doing that helps us see that we're not the same person that we were 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or a year ago, or a month ago, because change is always occurring. Okay. Our attitudes, our opinions, our values are different, and these differences are attributable to the path, okay, to applying these tools, the tools of the practical Dharma. Many of us have trouble giving ourselves credit for change. We're kind of dismissive of it. I think that's unfortunate because if we reflect on the goals that we've achieved, however incremental, the lives we've touched and how that's changed the way we interact with people around us, the wisdom you acquired, the level of change over the past month or years. I can tell you my family is incredibly grateful for my being on this path because it has sure reduced their suffering over the years. And they will tell me that. Um, this evolution on the path is a potent motivational force, but we've got to acknowledge it and recognize it. Not to cling to it, not to seek it, not to chase after it, but to say, golly, this stuff works. And I'm going to keep going because I like it. I'm happier, I'm stronger, I'm more grounded. The more changes are coming. This is wonderful. But always, always without clinging to an outcome. And that's the trick. Acknowledge, celebrate the change, but don't cling too tightly to how it should be. Accept it as it arises, accept it as it presents itself to us, but not chasing it, not clinging to it. So let me be quiet and let's talk about progress.